writer that I admire so much, and I pretty much read all the essays in the book before the book was the book.
Kate's my biggest fan, and I'm grateful.
And I also teach her work a lot.
I think she and my mother are the only ones who had all the essays.
There was maybe one that I haven't read.
Well, there's
two.
There's a few new ones.
Yeah, so those were a little bit new for me.
My mother didn't like those. I'm not kidding. Anyway.
Yes, stop talking. It's not your turn yet. So I'm going to read for just 10 minutes. I'm going to read from this long essay called Stumbling into Joy, which is it's a 3-part braided essay that is about me learning to play bass guitar in my 40s and kind of college time when I fell in love with the bass, and then the first all-female band who was signed to a major record label in the U.S. So I'm just going to read the beginning of that, and then Jill is going to read, and then we're going to have a conversation, and then you can join the conversation. And if you get really rowdy, you can just jump in whenever you want. So.
The way I did, but I'm not.
Except Jill, yeah, not Jill.
Yeah, I know. I mean, she's right there, but I can just stop talking. God, oh my God. I picked you up at the airport. What more do you want? So this is called Stumbling into Joy. The year I turned 43, I was in pain almost all the time. It wrapped like a mammoth hand around my right rib cage, squeezing. The culprit, a sluggish gallbladder. Pain is like a feral animal. It's unpredictable. It's not just the physical discomfort that's so disruptive. It's also the fear of the pain's return. So even when I had a good day, I knew it was short-lived. Would I feel okay tomorrow? Was it something I did or something I ate? Pain made me feel old. It also made me acutely aware of my own mortality. Finally, after 8 months of trying to address the pain on my own, I had my gallbladder removed. It took another 6 months for my digestion to stabilize, and when I finally felt better, I was relieved, but also a little shell-shocked. What had just happened? I shifted into taking stock mode. I was almost 44 years old, and ideally I still had half of my life ahead of me. How did I want to live it? And what were my regrets? Luckily, I didn't have many. I was happily married with 2 wonderfully spunky, smart, healthy, and kind daughters. My work as a writer, editor, and coach, despite not paying very well, gave me great pleasure. I reasoned that even the hard stuff I'd experienced in my life, which I would have gladly avoided if given the chance, had taught me something and had, as the saying goes, made me stronger. In fact, the single regret that rose to the surface as I examined my life was that I had not learned how to play the electric bass guitar when I was younger. I had always wanted to, but I never even picked one up. I mentioned this to my husband Donnie and to a number of close friends who all said the same thing. It's not too late. But of course it was. How could I justify the expense when there were medical bills, groceries, soccer fees, piano and dance lessons to cover? And between juggling work and the girls' schedules, plus time with family and friends, when would I have time to practice? And what did I know about playing the bass anyway? Absolutely nothing. I was a freshman in college when I first began to notice and fall in love with throbbing bass lines. In high school, I primarily listened to classic rock and top 40. The most alternative I got was early R.E.M., with a little of the replacements thrown in toward the end of high school. So when I got to my small liberal arts college in the middle of Iowa in 1990, and my new friends started making me mixtapes of their favorite music, well, it was as if a whole new universe opened before me. The music seemed to challenge the perfectionist good girl image I had always embraced. It was raw, gritty, and tantalizing. The people and music are all mixed up in my memory after all these years. I think it was my floor mate, Matt, lover of The Cure and Nirvana, who introduced me to Fugazi and the Pixies. It was my soon-to-be boyfriend who got me hooked on Billy Bragg and the Smiths. I fell in love with Uncle Tupelo, that alt-country phenomenon, all on my own when they came to campus on their No Depression tour. But what about Dinosaur Jr., Ned's Atomic Dustbin? More than 25 years later, I begin to scroll through the music of those years, though I'm not sure what I'm looking for exactly. Maybe an answer to the question, why the bass? My stepbrother Kyle, who's a drummer, recently told me that an instrument chooses you, not the other way around. I love the certainty with which he said that. It seemed to elevate the relationship between instrument and musician to some sort of mythical level. And it also seems true. Specific instruments do speak to us. But why had the bass guitar spoken to me? Why does it still? I turn first to Fugazi's Waiting Room from their 1989 album 13 Songs. The bass kicks off the song low and steady, accompanied only by the rhythmic thwack of a drumstick on the rim of a snare drum. Even now, the solidness with which the bass begins a song makes me feel both exhilarated and safe. It fills my chest, demands that I be fully, physically present. Then the chaos builds as the guitar drums and Ian MacKaye on vocals dive in. Listening now, I realize that the bass is what grounds the song, so the other dissonance has room to exist. I didn't have words for this when I was a freshman. I just remember thinking, oh my God, this is possible? Next, I turned to Burning 2 and Bad Mouth, my other favorites from 13 Songs. I listened to them again and again, and the insistent bass and drums, the anger and desperation in the lyrics pull me into the past. I feel a tiny door inside me click and begin to creak open. When I move on to Ned's Atomic Dustbin, I suddenly see a 19-year-old version of myself in my sophomore dorm room. She looks so young. Godfather, Ned's first album, is blaring on the stereo, and I am literally bouncing off the walls. No, that's not right. I'm actually throwing myself against the walls. But am I laughing or crying? I don't remember if I was trying to be funny or if I was trying to hurt myself. It could have been either or both that year. The video I keep going back to is grainy, black and white, and the sound is distorted, though not as badly as it could be considering it was shot for French television in 1971. And anyway, I stopped noticing the distortion altogether a few bars in when I fall under the spell of the singer's careening Joplin-esque voice and the way her fingers glide across the frets of her 1962 Fender Precision bass. The band is Fanny, and they are seriously rocking out. Center stage, Alice DeBur's drumsticks are flying. She's flanked by Jean Millington, the bassist on the left, and June Millington, shredding the guitar on the right. June and Jean are sisters, and they both have long dark hair and 70s shirts with flowing sleeves, Jean in black, June in white. Behind Jean, Nikki Barclay is pounding away on the keyboard, her head swinging from side to side. But it is Jean and her Fender that mesmerize me. The index and middle fingers of her right hand pluck and slap the strings, her bass line anchoring the song, while June's guitar riffs careen out and back. Jean is also singing, which is no small feat. It's extremely difficult to sing a melody while simultaneously keeping bass in rhythm with time with the drums. But Jean seems both totally at home and totally uninhibited. She looks like a rock star. And she should, since Fanny was the first all-female band to release an album with a major record label, Reprise Records, in 1970. And yet somehow I hadn't even heard of Fanny until recently, when in my search for the answer, why the bass, I came across an article about pioneering all-female rock bands. I had listened to or at least heard of many of the bands mentioned in the article, but Fanny was new to me. I was too young to have heard them when they were playing together. I was 3 years old when they broke up in 1975. But I knew and loved plenty of other bands from that era. How had I missed Fanny? Where had they been? Was their low profile due to the fact they recorded together only for a handful of years? Certainly it had something to do with them all being women. But I wonder what might have happened to me, to other girls, if Fanny had been more visible while we were growing up. My first weeks at college, I was desperately, painfully homesick. I'd left behind a close group of girlfriends and Mike, the boyfriend I dated since I was 15, and I missed the safety and predictability of those relationships. And though Mike and I decided to break up when I went to college, I missed him. It didn't help that my roommate and I didn't seem to have anything in common. She must have been feeling as out of her element as I was, but what I heard in her voice was terseness and exasperation. So early one morning while she slept, I folded myself into the closet and dialed Mike's number. When he answered, the tears were immediate. I pressed the receiver to my mouth and tried in a whisper to explain my loneliness. It was that loneliness that led me in search of friends, and I gravitated to the room of Brian, an acquaintance from high school who was also a freshman and lived a few dorms away from me. When I'd stop by, he'd often be jamming with his roommates, and I'd stand in the door watching them play. How this level of noise was tolerated by their neighbors, I have no idea. One evening they were playing, and one of his roommates, my soon-to-be boyfriend, was all amped up, a crazy glint in his eyes. He looks dangerous, I thought. And then, inexplicably, I want to date him. Perhaps the thing I really wanted, the thing I craved, was the ability to create that same caterwauling explosion of noise, a way to express myself. Or perhaps what I wanted was that kind of friendship, a community built out of music. But I didn't understand any of that at that time. A few days before Mother's Day, just shy of my 44th birthday, and on the tail end of my months of taking stock of my life, Donnie mentioned that there was a present for me in the basement. It's under a blanket, so don't go snooping around. Later, when I went down to change the laundry, I saw a huge mound in the corner. We're not extravagant gift givers, and I had no idea what it could be, so I put it out of my mind. The following Sunday, Donnie and the girls brought me breakfast in bed. This is our Mother's Day tradition. They bring me a latte and a huge bowl of fresh berries that have been marinated in sugar overnight. Together, we devour the berries as I open their cards. I paused at the wording in Donnie's card, which had a cryptically musical message, and looked up at him, but he just smiled. Then I admired the note that Stella had written for me on a piece of fabric and the gift Zoe had made at school. Grass growing in a cup with her photo affixed to the front, so it looked like the grass was sprouting from her head in a wild green mohawk. Do you want your other present now, Donnie asked? It's downstairs. I'll wait, I said, not ready to break up our cozy berry festival. But then Zoe beamed up at me, bursting with an undisclosed secret. Can I play your present? Can you play my present? And suddenly I thought of the mound in the basement and the wording in Donnie's card. The clues clicked into place. No way he couldn't have. Oh my God, I said, I need to see it. We all ran downstairs, and there it was in the middle of the living room, a gigantic box on which was pictured an electric blue and white Fender P bass and an amp. He bought me a bass. What? I squeezed Donnie and the girls and saying, oh my God, oh my God. Then I jumped around, the anticipation and disbelief and joy all jumbled up as Joey chanted, open it, open it. And how odd that I was so excited. But it felt as though I had just been granted a wish I hadn't been brave enough to pursue on my own, a wish I couldn't even explain. Why the bass? I didn't know, and now that I had one, I wondered whether I could really learn to play it. After it was unpacked, I held the bass, which was heavier than I expected, on my lap, struggling to attach the strap. When I finally slipped it over my head, I posed while Zoe snapped a photo. In it, I look a little wild. I'm still in my pajamas, my reddish hair messy. I'm looking to the side, my eyes wide. My left fingers are spread across the neck of the bass, and the thumb of my right hand is resting on the pickup, which at the time I didn't know was called a pickup. My right fingers are splayed across the strings. I don't look stable, nor do I look like I know how to play the instrument with my hands. Yet I can feel the energy. It is literally electric. So now welcome to we're going to read part of one of her essays, and then we will discuss.
Okay, I'm all distracted.
Wait,
That was
my
awesome.
water. Was that my water?
There's another one right under there.
Under my chair?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh.
You just drink mine. That's all right. You take that. No.
Sorry. Thank you for your reading. That was awesome. I tried to get her to bring the bass tonight. I thought that would be good.
Yeah.
You have it hidden somewhere?
Oh, it's at home. I mean, no, not here. I didn't bring it.
Okay. Electric cup on the waters. Thanks for coming, everybody. Thanks, Rachel. Thanks, Amy, wherever you are, for making this happen. I'm going to read, it's not the title essay, but it's the image title essay, because of the googly eyes, right? So when my daughter, who is now 18 and has just gone off to a small liberal arts school, as has Kate's daughter, so she had to read about them, about being lonely in her dorm room, right? She was like, oh, did they have to use the googly eyes on the front? And so I'll read you a little bit about why. The googly eye. Mark had gone to work, and Ella and I were sitting at the kitchen table eating avocado sandwiches. Ella was not quite 3. Laying a finger aside of her nose, Santa style, Ella looked me in the eye and said, Mommy, my nose hurts. She paused. I have a googly eye in my nose. A googly eye, in our family lexicon, is a 3-dimensional white eyeball containing a shiny black disc that jiggles around behind a transparent plastic cornea. That's what makes it googly. I Googled googly eyes and learned that they're also called wiggle eyes or movable paste-on eyes. Googly eyes are flat on one side, the paper side, the side used for gluing eyeballs of various sizes to paper, shells, and upside-down egg cartons to make monsters, crabs, and silly caterpillars. The other side, the googly side, is convex, like the surface of a real eyeball. The googly eyes Ella's babysitter had brought over to stick onto funny monkey faces a few days earlier were big ones, at least half-inch across. Not the kind of thing you'd want to have in your nose, especially if you were 3 and in possession of such a small nose. I considered all this as I chewed a suddenly over large mouthful of bread that had turned hard and dry between my teeth. Washing it down with a gulp of lemonade, I studied Ella's face, her miniature button nose. How would a half-inch googly eye fit in that itsy-bitsy nose? Pulse quickening, I mustered all my parenting skills. I didn't have a lot of them. To keep my voice level and calm, which is not one of my parenting skills. As with most circumstances involving human error, I began with denial. What, honey? What did you say? She was watching me as carefully as I was watching her. Ella knew I heard exactly what she'd said. Oh, Mommy, she said, reading the panic under my act. She tossed her hair back in mock hilarity. No, I don't have a googly eye in my nose. Ha, ha, ha. I don't. I was just kidding you around, Mommy. I didn't know what to do. How did she even think to say a thing like that? I have a googly eye in my nose. Honey, I said, do you have a googly eye in your nose? No, she said. I said I was kidding you around. I let it rest. Maybe together we could pretend this one out of existence. And really, how could Ella have a googly eye up her nose? That would be nuts. That would be a medical emergency. And furthermore, how would it have gotten there? Ella's a smart girl. She wouldn't be foolish enough to insert a googly eye into her nostril. Who would do such a thing? Why? An hour later, I tiptoed into her room to check on her during her nap. She was snoring like a piglet. I put my face right up to her face as she lay on her pillow, cheeks pink, blonde hair sticking every which way, cherubic as all get up. The snore really was more squeal than snore. And was I imagining this? The sound seemed to be coming from just one nostril, the right nostril. Yes, a whistling wheeze. While Ella slept and sang, I consulted a book, Foreign Objects, nostril. The book said to not, under any circumstances, attempt to remove the object at home using a pair of tweezers. Tweezers, I thought. Of course. What a good idea. I read on. The removal process was a delicate one, and not only could a hapless panicky parent with a pair of tweezers damage the delicate nasal tissue, she could also make matters worse by A, lodging the object more deeply in the nose, or B, actually pushing the object into the throat, which could cause choking. The thing to do, the book said, was to call a doctor. When Ella woke up, I was waiting. She sat up and rubbed her nose. She whimpered and repeated her confession. My nose hurts. I pulled a book light from a shelf and sat on the edge of her bed. Okay, honey, I'm just gonna look up your nose and see what I see. As I moved in with the light, I heard echoes of that fierce child from William Carlos Williams's The Use of Force, the flushed and feverish girl the country doctor has to hold down, using a big silver spoon to pry open her teeth so that he can see her throat. It's not quite that bad, but Ella fights it, just as the wild-haired, blue-eyed Matilda refuses to reveal and thus confirm her diagnosis, diphtheria. Ella wants to hide her own disaster. No, Mommy, I was kidding you around. I don't have a googly eye in my nose. I don't. Swinging the leg over her little body, I pinned her forehead to the pillow with my left hand, gently. Then I angled the thin beam of the book light up into her right nostril. How do I describe what it was to look up into my preschooler's nose and see an eye, a googly eye, staring back at me? Accumulating mucus had slicked the surface, giving the eye a shining, evil glint. I will never forget this moment. Ella twisted under my hold and let out a squeaky cry. In the sudden burst of air, the eye shifted, and the dark pupil rattled with a menacing shimmy. I wanted to scream, holy shit! But good, calm, handling things mothers don't scream when they shine lights into their children's noses, do they? Even if there's someone there, staring them down. I blinked and looked again. Crap. I flicked off the light and released my grip on Ella's forehead. Okay, I said, okay, sweetie. There is a googly eye in your nose. The doctor's name was difficult to pronounce. There's a whole part where Mark's at work teaching poetry. It's in the essay. I'm mad at him mostly because he wasn't there, but that's really not fair. And so we meet at the doctor's office. The doctor's name was difficult to pronounce, but the nurse recognized this and told Ella she could call him Dr. Rock. Dr. Rock was not a man of great humor. And so I tried to sit back and let the man do his work without too much intervention on my part, but his gravitas made me edgy. He shone a special nose light up into Ella's nose. I can only imagine he saw the same thing I had. He flinched a tiny bit, mumbled something about taking a minute, and left the room. Dr. Rock didn't come back. Long minutes ticked by. When he finally returned, 2 nurses flanked him. Shit, I thought. It's going to take 3 of them? What are they going to do to her? What does he think's going to happen here? Can't he just pull it out with a pair of tweezers? Indeed, he had a pair of tweezers, albeit super long ones with an astounding slanting beak. The nurses were giggling a bit. One of them asked Ella why she did it. Did you think you were going to be able to see up your own nose? Ella was not amused at this point. The actual extraction was scary. First, Dr. Rock gave Ella tissue and tried to get her to blow out the googly eye. But in my limited observation, nose blowing is a skill that develops wondrously late in children. Even at almost 3, it's not just us. We thought maybe developmentally there was something wrong. Even at almost 3, Ella always sucked in instead of blowing out. Dr. Rock glided in on his wheeled stool. He was very deliberate and careful with his long tweezers, but they let me hold her. It took way longer than I thought it should. It was not over in an instant. There were many missed attempts. Dr. Rock had to wriggle the beak over the top of the googly eye and pull it down. This was a delicate operation. Finally, out it came, the googly eye. Ugh, I said. It's even bigger than I remembered. Dr. Rock held the googly eye aloft in his needle beak, both for the benefit of the nurses and his own consideration. He looked at Ella. So now you know that we never put anything in our noses or our ears. She's still mad about this, honestly. She felt unjustly scolded. I waited for the smaller than your elbow bit, but it never came. He plunked the googly eye onto a tissue and handed it to me. Ella, still snuffling, asked if she could take it home for her memory box. I agreed that that was a good idea. And when the anxiety of our own situation abated, I quizzed Dr. Rock about the kinds of things he pulls out of children's noses. I thought he was going to tell me that he extracts something from a nose every week or so, but in fact he said that things in noses visits average 3 or 4 a year. I would have thought it would be more, I said. What kinds of things do kids put up their noses? Mostly vegetable, he said. Beans, peas, things like that, and little stones. He finished writing on the billing report and handed it to me. What's the weirdest thing you've ever pulled out of someone's nose? Dr. Rock thought for a moment, and then he said, a high-heeled shoe. I gasped. A shoe? Belonging to a Barbie, he clarified, raising his substantial eyebrows. Still, he didn't smile. Silly, hysterical mother who doesn't supervise her kid well enough to prevent the introduction of foreign objects to the nasal cavity. Then he shook our hands and left the room. For her trouble, Ella got a purple Care Bear sticker, which she stuck in the bag with the sticky eye, the googliness of which seemed intensified, or maybe somehow animated, from the time it had spent in the living body. So now we can all relax a little, move the eyes out of the nose. I was gonna try to find it in the memory box. That's
Oh, I'm so glad you didn't.
It's this one. No. The next morning at breakfast, I asked Ella why she did it. What I wanted to know compelled her to stick that googly eye in her nose. She looked up at me and said, I thought it would be different. Oh, I thought, yes, that's it. Ella's assessment explained a lifetime of my own biggest mistakes. I thought it would be different. As a kid, when I jumped off the roof of the house with a garbage bag as a parachute, I thought it would be different. In high school, when I signed up for that course in trigonometry, I thought it would be different. Still in high school, when I climbed into the Jeep with the way too old for me boy who'd been drinking blue Hawaiians out of a milk jug, I thought it would be different. Having survived and made it to college, when I stuck out my tongue and accepted the proffered tab of LSD at the Oregon Country Fair, I thought it would be different. Later, in graduate school, and certainly old enough to know better, when I traipsed after my girlfriend in the steaming, snake-infested Alabama woods after midnight to find a skinny dipping hole, I thought it would be different. When I was laboring with Ella, and I refused to let the nurse find a vein and put in a heplock, I thought it would be different. In all of these unfortunate circumstances, before I stepped forward and entered my own mistake, too deep to extract myself without feeling the pain or embarrassment of both of my own bad choices, I thought it would be different. I neglected to consider how hard the ground, how unfathomable the function, how drunk the driver, how potent and troubling the drug, how thick the underbrush, and how much a woman can bleed. What then had I wanted? How had I thought it would be different? Well, I thought the bag might catch the air and carry me like a paratrooper or a butterfly, gently to the ground. I thought my mastery of sines, cosines, and tangents might elevate me to another level of intellectual superiority in my high school. I thought the boy in the Jeep might think me adventurous and cool, and in return would love me. I thought the LSD might take me somewhere beautiful, away from the stinking porta potties and patchouli of the dusty fair to pure happiness. I thought the swimming hole would be right down the road, just 5 minutes, and that the Alabama moon shining on the water would illuminate everything. And I thought I would give my baby safe and natural passage into this world without drugs or intervention. I thought it would be different. Different how? I asked Ella, watching her skewer a piece of waffle with a toothpick. She shrugged. Can I play now? I nodded and she slid down from her booster seat, dutifully parrying Dr. Rock's good advice. We never put anything in our ears or noses. Right, sure. But then, what if we could stick googly eyes in our noses to see the dark secrets of our bodies? How cool would that be?
So I'm going to pull off this.
I like how Kate and I dressed ourselves alike. Even our shoes are the same shoes, I think.
I'm just going to get myself a little more so I don't clothesline you across your neck. So this is Jill's very first event for this book. I don't know if I said that. So book launch. It's very exciting. And I have a few questions that I worked on for Jill, but mostly we're just going to chat, but I'm going to kick off with some questions. And I, of course, have my glasses on because I can't see without them.
Me neither.
So, you've written many of the essays in the book have been written over many years.
Yes.
And as I said, I've read many of them, but I'm very curious about how you decided to put them together in this way, and you settled on these different parts and the ordering. And did it feel easy? Or did you do lots of shifting around?
Always super easy. I never do anything that's easy, I don't think. It was multiple things, actually. So there's a poem at the beginning of the book, and the poem really has been meaningful to me. My husband Mark is sitting here, so I won't embarrass him. So Mark said this Cummings poem, since feeling is first into my ear very early in our relationship. So I had always thought of it as kind of fundamental in our love story. And wonder of wonders, it became public domain in January of 2022. So I could use the whole poem. And it really, really works in 3 parts. And I was kind of thinking about the principle of threes in design. And I was also thinking about the way, I knew it was a love story. And I knew that it was a love story for multiple people. Beginning with my fiance, who was killed in a car accident when I was very young. Moving on to being the essays that are really about kind of a love story with myself and how it was that I healed from both childhood trauma and that loss, to be the kind of person who could then be with this person and then make 2 more little people and a family together, the kind that I'd always wanted to have. So I don't know if that answers your, but I was kind of thinking in the sort of, I mean, it's kind of beginning, middle, end, right? It was kind of, I just thought of it in triplets. And then in addition to being the very hot young man who whispered the poem into my ear, my husband is also a very good editor. I don't know if you know this about him. So then I gave the book to him, and he was like, he also doesn't mince words, and he said, no, not this one, not this, no, yes, and then we had a book.
So you cut out a bunch based on.
Oh yeah, I mean, so I started. These essays are, the oldest one I think is 15 years old. So they've been a long time coming, and there are many more where these came from. So there's like a lot that I didn't use that weren't really part of this story, but these kind of built around this framework of that kind of the arc of that love story. Thanks, honey.
Good job, Mark. I'll send you some stuff to edit soon.
Please do.
I actually will. His poems could maybe use your eye on them, but.
He's good at essays, stories,
All right,
poems.
well, there you
It's
go.
brilliant editor.
So the last essay in this collection is called Spinning. It's the longest essay in the collection, and we had talked about this before, and in terms of how you wrote it, and you said that you described writing it modularly.
Modularly.
Modular. I've had a
Point at me
very
every time you want me to
hard
say
day.
it. Yeah.
She said she wrote it.
Modularly.
And so I'd love for you to talk about that specifically with this essay and like what that means to you for people who don't use that term. And then kind of talk about like whether, how does your approach to writing change or not change based on like the length of the essay, the subject matter, like time of year, how you're feeling that day, like whatever it is, if it changes or not.
Yeah.
So that's a two-part question.
That's a good question. The second part's really hard. I don't know if I know that, but I'll work on it.
Okay, well, think about it as you're just answering the first part.
Okay, you might have to rephrase it for me at the end. Okay, so I guess the modular piece of it, and I often write like this. Many would call it braided, but I don't always feel that the act feels like braiding to me. Essays frequently come to me. They don't come to me. I work them out in pieces. So, like in Spinning, almost always it's some story that got stuck in my head, or some moment, or some image, or some line of dialogue. Like the googly eye, it really all came from that moment where she said, "I thought it would be different," right? And I was like, "Oh my god!" So, and it also came with the story, which at the time was not at all funny, but in retrospect is funny, right? So that was great. So it had a core story, but it was really about this idea about how we make mistakes and try to. That says a lot about how we like try to fix mistakes and make mistakes worse, right? We've all done these things. So in the case of Spinning, I had this really crazy thing happen where my fiance that I mentioned appeared in my cycling class at the Y many years after he had died. Like I could see him in the mirror behind me. So you'll have to read the essay to see how that goes. But also it was a portal like through the music too. So it has like these threads of the different songs that were playing as it was happening, which of course music is, as Kate just demonstrated for us, is always attached to memory, right? And then it also had, and I wish Kate I could say that I do all of this with like purpose and intention. But I don't. I kind of write my way to the next thing, and then I figure it all out, right? So it takes a lot of mapping out, and I do very elaborate, like then I break it down. So then I got thinking about all the different ways there are to spin. You can spin a quarter. Sufis spin. Everybody writes. So then I just was always, for weeks, I walked around thinking about different things that spin, right? And then those were the chunks that I was putting together. Then the narrative, the songs, and the different ways there are to spin. And then I kind of make a map of them, and I start putting them next to each other, because what I'm interested in as an essayist, one of the things is what happens when two things that we don't expect to be next to each other are next to each other and something new happens, right? And I'm in it for that surprise. Does that answer your question? So first it's a big mess, but then I figure out, I look at it and I'm like, oh, what I've done here is there's ways to right? I feel like I'm not helping. And then I figure out how I can what happens when I put different sections next to each other.
And so what was the surprise for you in the writing of that essay?
In spinning, the surprise, I remember it totally. It was the moment where I realized that, because after Colin died, in my grief, I thought I will wait for you always. Like, I don't know what I meant by that, right? I was a grieving 20-year-old. And in the working through all of that moment of thinking he'd come back, but here's this guy, and we got a couple kids, right? Really, and I thought to myself, I didn't wait for you. I didn't, right? That was a surprise. I was really, when I realized that,
I'm glad you didn't wait.
Right. That would have also been crazy. But I felt like I was good, and I hadn't really had that until I was working through those pieces in the essay. I hadn't realized that that moment, that I hadn't, which also kind of happened in the moment of me thinking, that's him. Do I do something? What do I do? So.
I love that. So the way I call it working in sections. Little pieces that
It's also that.
need to maybe be in something, and you're not sure which ones actually will be in there and which ones won't. And so you write a bunch of different things that are not connected, and then you work out how they might fit
How
together.
do you do it that's different from what I described?
It's the way you just described it, but I guess I'm stuck on the word module. That feels like little pods or bubbles of
I meant it more I think it was the wrong word. First of all, unpronounceable. So
Yeah.
that's not fair. Second,
I'm tired. I didn't sleep well last night. It's hard for me to pronounce
I'm
things.
surprised we're as smart as we are. So I think we're pretty smart. But I don't always block
Yeah.
because I don't know. It doesn't always feel like braiding to me.
I don't
Because I think we overuse an essay and we overuse the idea of braiding. It doesn't.
Yeah.
Sometimes it feels more like stacking blocks.
And so my second part of the question was, do you approach shorter pieces that way? Do you approach how is it different if you know this is gonna be a long essay, I'm gonna write it this way? Or does it come out or the day of the week, or you're tired? How does your writing change based on all of these other factors? How you approach the writing?
The structure of the essay, just getting the work done.
Yeah, getting the work done.
I try to just I don't have a muse of any sort. I never get someone's gonna come down and give me inspiration. That's not a thing. But I do often have magic things happen when I'm writing a sentence, and then I write the next sentence, and I'm like, oh, I see where this is going. So the only way I know how to answer that question is just kind of, how does it change by mood? I think, I think being tired can be really good for writing. I heard, the children's book, Click, Clack, Moo, Cows That Type? They came, I'm blanking on her name right now. Betsy Lewin was the artist, and Doreen Cronin, thank you. I read that book a lot of times. Click, clack, moo.
Me too.
Anyway, these writers, they came to Ball State, and of course, because I'm not afraid to use my power for good, I had them come to our kids' preschool class so I could have a little more time with them. And when Doreen Cronin was talking about writing Click, Clack, Moo, Cows That Type, she said that she'd gotten up at 5 o'clock in the morning because it was when her kids were sleeping, and she needed to work. And she said, that's a great time for me to work because I'm so tired that the part of my brain that says that is absolutely the ridiculous thing to say, cows that type, that's stupid, is not awake yet. So she can't bother me. So I think that's too, like, I think the more I write and the older I get, like, I'm more, my students look at me like I'm mad when I tell them this. I'm like, just the weirder it is, like, someone's inside your mind is gonna say, that's dumb, or that someone said that, or like, that's too weird. People are gonna, write that down. You know what I mean? So I do think, and I think so I think that tiredness helps with that. And that's actually good, because it helps me in that initial, like, self-editor. If she's just kind of leaving me alone, then I can get more, because a lot of the good stuff comes from the weird stuff. Does that answer your question? Tired is okay.
Yeah,
right?
tired's good. All right, we'll go with that. I mean, I think what I was trying to get at too is like writing things that are like flash, like maybe it's one image or one thing.
Yeah.
You know, like and that feels like such a different process than working on, I mean, a book or a long, something that you know
Right.
is long.
I don't ever know it's long until it's long.
Well, you used to only write long, right?
I know.
Was Spinning a true story? Wasn't it a true story?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I mean, for a while there I was writing, and I would say, my joke, which I stole from a poet, but who said it about poems first, but I kept writing these 10 to 12,000 word essays, and I would say, haha, to fill the great demand for them, because nobody was publishing, like, there was no point in writing them, except for that that's what I was doing, so I just kept doing it. But then, like, the world rewarded me, and True Story came along, and, like, long form, like, then people are like, oh yeah, we'll publish these, it's great. So, but I don't think I'm working on other things right now, so that keeps me from, Mark tells me not to write so many sections. He's like, can anybody write just a normal sized essay anymore?
We'll have to read all these essays. Not just hers.
He's like, how about a nice short essay?
What would be a good length for you? What do you think is the perfect size?
Maybe like a 5-page essay.
Yeah,
Pages.
I know. He wants like 1,500 words.
Oh my God, are you a blogger?
I'm so
You're excused.
So I'm working against a lot of pressure at my own home these days.
Yeah, that's hard.
Yeah, it's a cross I bear.
I'm working on that too.
Yeah, go. We can open up to questions because I have questions, but let's see what other people. What are you working on?
I am working. He's looking at me to see if I'm gonna lie. I'm a memoirist, to tell the truth. We're not recording this. I'm actually working on a novel. I know. And some essays, and one really long essay. And yes, so yeah, so I'm doing a little fiction, and it has been gloriously fun, actually. I mean, is it still dabbling in, I grew up in I went to a one-room schoolhouse on a mountain in a marijuana growing community when I was a teenager, and I've never really written that much in my we've been there in my nonfiction, but I haven't spent a lot of time with it. And it's also like, you don't want to there's a lot of folks that don't really want me telling all the true things about that place, and so it's been a fun place because I was worried about saying this or saying that, and I was like, you know what, we're gonna do this in fiction, so that's fun. What about you? What are you working on?
I am trying to finish up a proposal for my second writing guide, which
Yay.
I've got to get that done. And then I've been doing a little poetry, as I told you guys, which is bizarre. Poetry! I'm doing a little poetry. But a lot of short stuff, just because I didn't have the bandwidth to do long things. So.
Yeah.
But I want to start what's going to be probably a long essay, and I just know this going into it, which is why I don't want to start it because it's going to be so painful to write it. About my dad's tangerine tree that I inherited after he died, and there's lots. I spent a lot of time thinking about this tree and whether the leaves are healthy and repotting and testing the soil and making sure it doesn't die. So there's a story there for that. So that's a long essay, I think, but I don't know what all is involved yet because I haven't started to write it. But there was something that I had a question, and then and that went out of my head. So, yes, Heidi.
So Jill, I read in one of your essays, and maybe it was spinning, but I know that you said that something like this, you just keep writing this story, you keep
Yeah.
writing this story.
Yeah.
So has this essay collection, do you think that sort of put that story to rest, or do you think it
The
will
story of
always-
Colin's
yeah,
death?
do you think it will always be
I
there?
mean, I think we writers have the things that we just return to again and again. I mean, it was such a foundational loss for me, right? That it's, even when it's not about Colin, it's about my kids, right? It's about my overprotective parenting. It's about my, it's always there. So it's one of my, I think that writing grief, I don't know. I mean, I guess we'll see.
Yeah.
It's not directly in anything I'm working on right now, so it's possible.
I mean, did you feel like
But I
there
have,
was a
like-
shift when you were putting it?
I mean, I guess with spinning in a way, like, it's not like it holds on to me or like I need to, it's more like I use, it's more like I understand the world through how I came to understand that loss more, So it's not that I'm, that grief is like holding me in the past. That's not it at all. It's that it shifted my empathy for people. It shifted kind of the way I see the world. It shifted just this kind of understanding that you can have something you love, and so that just affects the way you operate, as so all of us know, right? So I think that just, I don't think that'll ever be something I don't kind of touch in my writing. I mean, I was also abused as a kid, sexually abused, and that one comes back and back, and that one I've tried, like aggressively tried to stop, right? And I've written the words, every essay can't be about I cannot, no, and I really can't. I don't. You can't really turn away from the things that are your subjects, I think, and those are a couple of mine.
That was
Yeah.
actually going to be one of my questions. I think Stephen Church, who's an essayist, called it like the revving engine or some kind of he called it the engines, like, because his brother had died young, and he keeps coming back to this subject matter, like from all these different angles, and you think you're done with it. And I remember Hope Edelman, who's working on The Possibility of Everything, which is a memoir about her daughter being possessed by a invisible friend.
Yeah.
But in the end, she was like, oh my God, this is still about my mom dying when I was 17. Like the ways that those losses or those big subjects come back. But I was going to add to Heidi's question and just how it changes. I mean, you did talk about the one that you resist. You're like, I don't want to write about this anymore, and it just weaves itself in.
Yeah, and I do try to resist because it hurts my mother. It's because I'm worried about other people that she doesn't. But I don't know how to not do that. So when my daughter turned the age that I was when the abuse started, there it is, right? Like those kinds of things are just kind of part of the fabric of who I am. So they have to be part of the fabric of what I write. But, so yeah, I'm trying to think. Do I have any really core happy stories that I bring in?
Mark?
Me?
Yeah. There he is.
Your kids.
I do. See, so I've got a lot of joy to balance out the,
Well, the other thing that's
I've been stumbling into joy for a lot of years now.
There you go.
See
I like it. Nice job. I mean, I think one of the things that I like too is that, and seeing the essays next to each other, like the kind of dailiness. I mean, the kind of daily life things, and there are those moments in the daily life that feels it's grounded in the safety that then lead you
Right.
back to these other places that are maybe not as safe or
Yeah.
harder, but we know you're okay
Yeah.
as a narrator, and that makes it easy to read for me.
Yeah, good.
And you also do, I think, a very respectful job of dealing with some of the sexual abuse. I'm thinking of the Slaughterhouse Island. That you don't make the reader live it with you.
Right. I think about that a lot because I don't ever want anything I write to be traumatizing to the reader.
I know, and I worked with somebody.
And you have to think about that a lot.
Yeah, I worked
in order
with
for it not to be.
somebody on a thesis, and I read this section,
Yeah.
and I was like, oh my God, I can't unread this, I can't unsee this, and I just,
Yeah.
I felt sick, and I was like, there has to be a way. So I did say, I might want to look at that scene because you don't need to traumatize your readers either.
Right.
In that way.
Because it isn't necessary in order to do what you need to do in terms of thinking about the questions about that event. Yeah. When you write an essay, like you were talking about the tree, like your dad's tree, does it start, like how does it start? I've been thinking about this with my students lately. Image, line, dialogue, object.
I think it was like, oh my God, I've spent a whole lot of time on this tree. And knowing the core of it for me, like I was like, I am doing this because I couldn't keep my dad alive. And this tree is not dying on my watch. And so that was this kind of aha. And then I was like, okay, there's something here. And I don't know what is around it. It's probably our relationship, but the stage of so I kind of start thinking, oh, there's something here. And why am I obsessed with this tree? Donnie can attest to it. I'm like, oh my God, there's another leaf. Look at, they're getting yellow. What I'm like, don't touch the tree. And then the cat would jump on the tree trunk, and I was like, ah! I like just really freaked out. And it was like, I was like, don't touch the tree. And then it's thinking, okay, well, I know the stage of this is me hauling this tree in my house so he could die in the same room with this tree, and then this care of this tree over these and the things I had to do when it started to like falter. So I mean, me showing up at multiple garden stores, being like, these are the leaves. This is a really important tree, and then be like, oh my God, this is a really important tree. Like, can you come talk to this lady? She's freaking out, just like that. And then not knowing yet what is the other part of this, what goes in there, but it's kind of like a cloud.
Yeah.
And then
See, that's the thing,
Make
right?
a list. Make a list.
all many of my exercises start with make a list. And
Oh,
so
yeah, the writer's best friend.
it's easy to be. What were you
Yeah.
gonna say?
Well, like in that case, right? Like it's not like, in a way, the essays, the subjects do sort of choose us the way the instruments do, right? Yeah. So you gotta write it.
No, I gotta write it. Yeah, that'll be my next thing. Any other questions? I have one more then, and it's about kind of your Jill the writer pops into many of these essays, and I guess I didn't realize how often that happens, but with them all together, I'm like, oh, there's Jill the writer again.
You know what I noticed? I'm always grading essays in these essays.
You are
I was like,
professor.
why didn't I edit those out? I'm like, in the line at the drive-thru, grading essays in my lap. I'm like, got an infant in my arms, suckling, grading essays on her head. I'm like, put the essays down. You poor woman. I mean, I just look. The kids these days are going to be like, she has no work-life balance. It's embarrassing.
But is there work-life balance as a
I've
professor?
never.
I don't think
I've
so.
never had that.
Yeah.
I scoff.
Yeah, I know that.
I mean, it's all one thing to me, really, because I love my work so much,
Yeah,
which I really do.
I know you do. You're really good at it.
Anyway, keep going. Sorry, but yes, the writer's there, and as is the grader of essays.
Yes, so, I mean, it doesn't feel, I mean, I think sometimes this can be a risk. It can be irritating to pull the reader out of the narrative and say, okay, here I am, the writer, and I never feel that with you. And partly because I think it's your identity as a writer, and you're kind of you're such a, you're working things out always on the page, and all of that questioning, I think, and then you'll be like, okay, but you drafting it, so you're sitting there working in your mom's, and you're writing, and then instead of doing napping, I just wrote these pages that came just before, and you hand a draft to Mark, and he's like, what do you think, you're better than everyone else? Like, and I just
Really?
wonder, like, if that, it feels just like that's how it comes out for you.
Yeah, I mean, I take a lot of that stuff out, right? So, but some of it, you know, I think we make these decisions when we write essays, right? So you have the scaffolding sort of comes with getting the essay down on the page, and then you decide how much of the scaffolding you want to remove afterwards. And often I will remove a lot of it, but then sometimes it's become an essay that's about working through the essay. I know. It must be annoying, but you say it's not, so that's great.
No, it's not. You did understand that it's not annoying with your pieces.
I mean, I do often take some of that out, so I must take enough out so that it's not annoying. But I think that my gift as an essayist, if I have one, is that I just never know I'm never sure I know anything at all, right? So each question just leads to the next question, which just leads to the next question. So the reason you see me working it out on the page is that I persist in working it out.
Yes.
You know, and I am dogged.
I know that.
So there's that.
And also, they go away in the summer and they work in her mom's hot little.
This is fading. This glory, but yeah. We used to go. My mom lives in Washington State, and there's no internet, which is great. Now, alas, you can get a hotspot, which is unfortunate. So that's bad. It was best when there was nothing, because the very best thing you can ever do for your writing is have no internet access at all. And it's not. I mean, if you need to look up the sleeping habits of sloths, the internet will be there when you get back, right?
Make a list. Make
You
a list.
make a list. Things to look up. Sleeping habits of sloths, right? So you don't have to like do it there and then spend 2 hours on the internet instead of writing. So first it was no internet, and then when the kids were little, they would go downstairs and be with their grandmother, and we would be in this, like, it makes it sound fancy, this loft by the lake that, I mean, it's a garage. And it, like, it was, and what with the climate change, it's getting really hot up there. So that's not helping. But yeah, that was like I've never been to like a writer's residency, or I don't know those magic worlds that people talk about. But that was our closest thing to it. And also, he's on one side and I'm on the other side, and I know if he's messing around and not writing, he knows if I'm not. We can actually write in the same room quite well. And there, we know what the commitment is, because that time is so precious and rare. So we keep each other on track.
So how does it work during the school year when you're both teaching? Like, do you find little pockets of time to write, or do you just say, okay, this is, and we know we have summer, we can revise a little, or what does that look
We
like?
find pockets. He is very disciplined, and so it's annoying if he like goes in his room with his tea, he spreads out his writing, he's like, I'm like, got a pile of essays on my lap to grade. But he's in there with his tea, writing his poems. So that helps, because it makes me want to be, and truthfully, like right now, I would be lying if I was, like, I had a good summer, very regular, and I can have really good times if I just get a schedule it like you schedule your exercise. For me, that's what I have to do. And right now, with Ella going off to college and me worrying about everybody all the time, I've fallen off the last month, and it's one of the reasons I'm so discombobulated. I don't really function well when I'm not writing at least a little bit every day. Isn't that true? Things seem depressing. Like, I like writing a lot better than publishing.
Oh yeah. Well, you
Way
cried
better.
the whole day. The whole
Yeah, with the day the book came out, I had no party for myself. I did nothing. I just wept all day.
A lot of fun.
It was a lot of fun. Yeah.